You are watching In Your Interest, and the big story on this edition of In Your Interest is your grocery bills, which are going up by the minute. Now, if you've noticed, every time you try to get some quick commerce delivery, considering that's the flavor of the season, if you're trying to get some tomatoes, they're costing a lot more than usual. If you feel that, you're not alone. Prices have been climbing for over a month now. Wholesale costs of tomatoes have jumped by around 125 to 150% in many cities. This rise in prices in tomatoes and other vegetables has pushed retail inflation to a 9-month high, hitting nearly 5.5%, 5.49% to be precise, in the month of September. So if your grocery bill is feeling a bit heavier, this could precisely be the reason why. Food inflation has emerged as a significant concern for policymakers, as food items account for nearly 46% of the Consumer Price Index, or CPI, which is the main inflation data in India. This means that fluctuations in food prices can heavily influence overall inflation rates. Recent surges in the prices of tomatoes, onions and potatoes, often referred to as TOP or TOP, have highlighted just how volatile the situation can be. While these three vegetables comprise only about 4.8 or 5% of the food and beverages group, their impact on retail inflation can be substantial. Even minor price changes can ripple through the economy, affecting consumers like you and me directly. So what exactly is driving the surge in the price of tomatoes, onions and potatoes? Several factors come into play. Firstly, the short seasonal crop cycles and perishable nature of these vegetables create significant storage challenges. Unlike grains, which can be stored for extended periods, tomatoes, onions and potatoes have limited shelf lives, leading to supply shortages during off-seasons. Additionally, production is often concentrated in specific parts of the country, making supply chains particularly vulnerable to disruptions from anything from extreme weather events like heat waves and floods to even strikes by truck drivers. This regional focus can further strain supply of vegetables when demand spikes, leading to intense price volatility. Now, moreover, during lean seasons, when supply dips, prices soar. Conversely, bumper harvests can then lead to distressed sales where farmers are forced to sell their produce at prices below production costs. This erratic cycle underscores the need for a more resilient supply chain infrastructure in this country. Interestingly, despite these challenges, India's production of tomatoes, onions and potatoes has seen remarkable growth. For the 2022-23 season, estimates indicate production levels of nearly 20.5 million metric tons of tomatoes, over 30 million metric tons of onions, and a staggering over 60 million metric tons of potatoes. This achievement has positioned India as the world's second largest producer of tomatoes and potatoes, while it has surpassed China to become the largest producer of onions, accounting for 28.5% of global output, according to the Food and Agriculture Organization. Now, in response to the persistent issue of price volatility, the Reserve Bank of India has proposed several strategic measures aimed at stabilizing the market. First, agriculture market reforms are being pushed to encourage the development of private mandis. Now, this will provide farmers with more competitive options for selling their produce and enhancing the functionality of existing agricultural produce market committees. And secondly, there's a call for the reintroduction of potato futures trading, which was banned in 2014. There's also discussion about launching onion futures to improve price discovery and mitigate market risks. And looking ahead, the dynamics of food inflation in India will likely continue to fluctuate. Factors such as climate change, changing consumer preferences and global market conditions will all play a role in shaping the agricultural landscape, and policymakers need to remain proactive, implementing measures to enhance supply chain resilience and stabilize prices. Additionally, fostering collaboration between the government and the private sector and farming communities will be vital for creating a more robust agricultural framework. By working together, it's possible to develop innovative solutions that address the root causes of price volatility and ensure a stable food supply for all of us, both you and me. As we continue to monitor this situation, it's clear that the issue of food inflation, particularly concerning tomatoes, onions and potatoes, will require attention and action from all stakeholders concerned. And to talk about this further, we have Mr. Sujan Hajra, Executive Director and Chief Economist of Anand Rathi. We also have Mitali Nikore, Founder and Chief Economist, Nikore Associates. Thank you both of you for taking time out to be with us. I'm going to begin with Sujan. Sujan, food inflation has been sticky. Now it has gone to the point where it is the overall headline inflation number is out of the comfort zone of the Reserve Bank of India. primarily because of food inflation, primarily because of tomatoes, onions, and potatoes.
Yeah, so food inflation is notoriously volatile at any case. So in that sense, it's not a major surprise that the food is resulting in this kind of a situation. But having said that, there is, at least in the short term, there is very little that anybody, including the Reserve Bank of India, particularly the Reserve Bank of India, can do it. If you look at over a last 20-year period, on an average, food inflation has been similar to the non-food inflation. But the volatility of food inflation is much higher as compared to non-food. And that's a major concern. And I totally agree with you. This is the component which is introducing very significant volatility in India's overall inflation.
Mithali, it's now come down to what's cooking literally in the kitchen when it comes to inflation. You know, tomatoes, onions, and potatoes, all parts of this country, north, south, east, west. These three are staples in all cuisines across this country, length and breadth of this country. And clearly, it's tomatoes, onions, and potatoes are symptomatic of the larger problem, isn't it?
Absolutely, Krishna. I mean, it's our fifth year discussing this top inflation crisis. Every year we are talking about this at this time of the year, in fact. If you look at the data, and I've been analyzing the data for the last 5 years, it's a seasonality trend which is coming out very clearly that in the third quarter and fourth quarter of the year, we see a spike, in the food inflation. So, and that is driven entirely by the top prices. Now, why is this happening? What is the structural reason? One of the reasons is infrastructure and the lack of it. Because as you rightly said, and even in the introduction, there are certain states where the production of these top commodities is concentrated. Now, what do we need? We need to transport these commodities in a cold reefer truck, and then put them in a cold storage for a few months, so that we can increase the shelf life and so that we can have better distribution. Now, this is not very hard to figure out. I mean, this is a basic logistics question. Yet, we have not been able to properly figure out the distribution logistics for the top commodities. And these distribution logistics are then driving the price inflation on a year on year basis, especially in this time of the year when it is like, becoming off season. And the other point which I want to make is, if we recall our senior economist, most learned economist of this country, Amartya Sen, when he studied the droughts which happened in West Bengal, in the early part of this century, he said it was never the production of the food which was a problem; it was the distribution. And today we are seeing the same trend repeat again, where we are topping the world in production of these commodities, but it's the distribution, and especially the middle class and the lower middle class, which is feeling the pinch, in access to these commodities.
First, the problem here is that very little can be done, say, by the Reserve Bank of India to control food inflation. On the flip side, so much can be done in terms of ensuring better supply chains in this country, especially during off seasons. So much can be done to ensure that the supply of vegetables across the country can be more evenly done during off seasons and peak seasons and bumper harvest or not.
Yeah, that's true. But having said that, if you look at when we introduced reforms in 1991, since then till date, agriculture is the only sector which hasn't been touched by reform. The efforts to change the farm laws actually drew a huge amount of political debate, and even after passing those laws have been scrapped. Now, I don't want to go into the political debate of the merits and demerits of the laws which were put in place. But having said that, what is very important is there is huge requirement for investment in agriculture. Government is perhaps not in a position to make huge amount of public investment in agriculture in the form of canals or in the form of improving other productivity. So therefore, private investment is required, whether it's for supply chain and for other purposes to increase overall productivity. But that's not happening. So therefore, what is the structural response to this is reform, and that's something which is not happening, at least in the context of agriculture.
Mithali, are we looking at an urgent need for a reform, a revolution if need be, in agriculture to fix the problem of food inflation? Because I think that it looks like we have to go back to the core of it all and fix that, and then all our vegetable subsidy bills will start coming down.
Actually, I want to disagree with Sujan a little bit that, everything has to be done only when the reforms happen. There are actually a number of measures which can be taken in even our current framework and current context. The first reform, the first sort of measure which we can take is investment in agricultural infrastructure. If we have to improve the connectivity between, for example, rural areas and urban areas, this is going to disproportionately benefit agricultural economies. So there is no reason why we have to wait for, reforms to happen in pricing side for, investing in better road infrastructure or better storage infrastructure or better, cold storage infrastructure or more distributed reefer trucking. So that's the first thing. So infrastructure really does not have to wait. Second is, climate resilience and studying and researching climate resilience patterns. See, when we look at the change in climate, and we already have a lot of models available, a lot of international research has been done on what are the drought resistant crops, on what are the, kind of, distribution of different kind of seeds, etc., that needs to be undertaken for climate resilience. This can be done again immediately. And in terms of setting up incentive mechanisms for farmers to come and pick up and, invest in these crops, these can be done again in even our current setup. We have a setup of providing minimum support prices from the government side for procurement. Today, these minimum support prices are only for a set of commodities, and they are, of course, balanced in favor of rice and wheat. But now, with the millet mission, it has been shown that you can have minimum support prices for millets. And that has incentivized a number of farmers to take up millet farming. So, why can't we do the same for vegetables which are climate resilient and suited to the climate of particular regions, states, etc., and then use that and distribute it across the country with better transport infrastructure? So, we really don't need, any sort of reforms for these two, three very short term steps, which can be taken and in fact should be taken with public sector financing, not private sector financing, because private sector financing will come in at some point to help in their agri business or food processing businesses. But the base of agriculture has to be set by the government through public sector financing. And Krishna, this. I'm not somebody who advocates for government investment in pretty much any other sector, but agriculture is like a public good. It's a commodity that is required by everybody, the poorest of the poor, and therefore there is a rationale for public sector involvement.
Sujan, enough and more can be done in the current framework.
I totally disagree, because that's the biggest problem of the mindset problem, that agriculture doesn't. How do you create supply chain? Who will provide cold storage? Government will provide cold storage. You compare the public sector banks and you compare the private sector banks, and you look at the difference in service quality. You had public sector telecom companies, and you know what is the state of that. So I'm totally against public investment in agriculture. There has to be a mechanism to create incentive, to create, first of all, the roads. Roads are already there. If you look at in the last 10 years, the road infrastructure has increased by almost 40%. So the rural connectivity is not the issue. The issue is the cold chain. And in the cold chain, it's not there is nowhere in the world where there is publicly provided cold chain. It's private system. Today, the private sector does not have the incentive. And in many cases, because of the APMCs, the private players cannot operate in many of the mandis. So for that, you need reform. Without reform, nothing happens. And in agriculture, without reform, nothing will happen. The MSP, there are MSP for more than 20 commodities, but government actually procures 2, wheat and rice, and to some extent pulses. So the minimum support price is just assurance, which is not really honored. And basically, it's only in 3 states where the procurement happens: West Bengal, Punjab, and Andhra Pradesh. Most of the other states, there is no procurement for any other commodity. So I don't think, and going back to the government kind of control system, that is any solution. It has to be private investment, and for that there is reform.
Okay. Public investment, private investment. We're going to need all kinds of investment for a proper reform in India's agricultural sector so that our food bills, our thalis become lighter on the wallet. But I'm afraid we've completed out of time over here. Sujan Hajra, thank you so much for taking time out to be with us. And Mitali Nikore, thank you so much for being with us on the show and sharing your perspectives. And with that, we come to the end of this edition. Thank you so much for watching. This is Krishna Kumar signing off.